Hello. This thing working?
Is this one working?
It is. Oh, sounds amazing. Hi, friends. Hello, and welcome to our panel discussion. My name is Allan Campopiano. I'm a data scientist at Deepnote and the moderator for this session. But really, what is transformation? That's our title. Today, we won't be focusing on the standardized, tested, documented, GitHub type of transformations that we all know and love. Oh no, we'll be considering the transformations that live outside the walled garden of DBT, those that live in the wild, wild west of notebooks, Excel files, and legacy systems. Why do they exist? What purpose do they serve? Can we push them down into DBT? Should we? I don't know, but let's talk about it. And to join me, I've wrangled together three world-class data practitioners, each who bring a unique perspective to the table. So allow me to introduce them. To my left, Benji Knights-Johnson. Benji is a senior analytics engineer at DAZN, the global sports broadcasting and media platform. He's worked in data for over 10 years with experience building the full data infrastructure from scratch. His data team is responsible for transforming data with various sources into usable outputs for teams at DAZN. And next to Benji, we have Katie Bauer. Katie Bauer is the head of data at Gloss Genius, a leading software platform for beauty professionals in the US salon and studio space. She has previously built and led data teams at Reddit and Twitter, and is generally a big believer in the power of transformations to create consistent context across all teams at a company. And last but not least, Nils Werner. Nils is a lead ML engineer at the quantitative trading firm EOC Group. He's worked with data teams across a variety of fields, including edtech, finance, and criminal justice reform. He's focused on bridging the engineering and data science disciplines within EOC in order to streamline model life cycles. And so without further ado, Katie, let me ask you the first question, but of course everyone can feel free to jump in. Unfortunately, there are only two mics, so we will have to share. Look, sometimes companies are not using DBT at all. And we sort of like to pretend at this conference and on data Twitter that everyone's using DBT, but the reality of the situation is it might not be the case. What have you seen? What other bespoke or other kinds of systems would companies be using for data transformations?
Before this, we were talking about cursed data stacks, and I've definitely seen some cursed ones in my day. Whether it is a legacy code base that's existed for 5 years. Like, the interesting thing about code bases that have existed, that I said 5 years, I meant 15 years. Very different. But for 15 years, like, a lot of times companies make choices about technology based on what's available at the time, and sometimes what they need is not available, so they build it themselves. And then they get mired in tech debt, and you get a weird situation where there'll be some line of code that nobody really knows what it does, but it makes a lot of money for the company. So there's comments in there warning you. I may be referencing a specific line of code in one of my co-panelists' data stacks. But it says don't touch it, like don't breathe on it, otherwise something bad might happen. And that is a very common scenario for many companies, because something like DBT is relatively new in the grand scheme of data technologies. Another thing you see a lot is companies that kind of build their own in-house version of DBT. And it'll be a bit raw, like the interface, the developer experience is not as nice, but it does similar things, and I've definitely worked on systems like that as well.
I will admit to having a cursed data stack and supporting 15 years of ancient programming languages, and that comes with a bunch of unique problems. Well, they're not unique. I think they're actually more normal than we'd expect, and you know, it's nice to dream of a world where you're starting over with a nice data stack. But the reality is, when your code does make money, and you have business people who want to continue making money, it is hard sometimes to convince stakeholders to try out new technologies. And I think that's actually a fair perspective. I think a lot of new data tools, DBT included, and need to show why they should be integrated in a stack like ours and other cursed profitable data stacks, because that time spent could be spent doing other things that we know are going to drive profits more. So I think we find that it's very interesting to talk to companies that are like starting out with a new data stack, and like I'm very jealous of that sometimes. And for us, it's about finding like specific places where we can sort of cut through the time taken that it used to take to do analytics, and really gain advantage from that. And that's where we've switched from, for example, pulling out manually CSVs and like merging them in memory to piping everything into Snowflake and being able to do much faster queries. So going from like 1 week to 20 minutes to get those data sets. And it's interesting to sort of selectively decide to use tools in specific places and trying to integrate that over time.
Just a quick follow-up on that. How do you, like, especially because there are presumably people in this room who also have some version of a cursed data stack. It's like, if it ain't broke it, don't fix it. It's making money. I'm curious if any of you all have any tips. Like, how do you talk to stakeholders about that line of code that makes everyone a lot of money, but it's actually not sustainable, and here's how I think we should move forward with newer tools? Like, are there any tips you have in terms of communicating that? Because that seems like it would be really tricky to do.
So I would say show, not tell. For us, a lot of the improvements that we've had in our data stack has come from someone sort of as a side project testing out, what if we took Fivetran and pushed a lot of these smaller Postgres databases into Snowflake, and then all of a sudden you can do things that like were never possible before, and that's when it clicks for people, and it really opens up a realization that we could be so much better.
So you just have to you just have to find like an extra 8 hours in each day to build a separate side data stack, and then you have something to show, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Okay, I see. I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, it's about making them aware of that. I think you do kind of show them a little bit of it and say kind of like, this is actually happening. Like, someone in the company is probably kind of aware of like maybe why that's slightly happening, and showing them that is happening is allowing you to kind of potentially start getting off it, and that's like the first step of it, so that you can then potentially kind of say, all right, we're kind of taking this away actually, and going to see what happens with it. And that kind of allows you to take that step forward and like start taking it step by step of taking those things away and seeing what changes, if anything. Because like we've got a lot of those lines of code as well, more in kind of like business logic of our pipelines, where we're like, we don't know what this is doing, but actually we're just going to start taking it away and see if it changes anything. You take that away, you kind of compare the A to B, and you're going, it's the same. All right, cool. So it doesn't need to do anything. Like, I mean, you're scaling that back. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say is, while it's always better to have something concrete, like some kind of prototype that people can react to, in situations where you can't do that, the other transformation that you can do is to translate what you're talking about into time or money, because those are universal languages of business. And if you can quantify the impact of deprecating something that's really complex to maintain, that is a good way of selling an improvement in your data stack.
Yeah, that's a good point. Benji, I can appreciate the fact that you're in this amazing position where you have experienced Zone's data stack before DBT and all of the unstandardized approaches that come along with it, and now you're actually building this all up into DBT land. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the types of transformations. Again, these are non-DBT transformations that you've come across, like things that live in notebooks or other places where you see transformations happening.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because we've only recently, in the last kind of 6 months, a year, started properly going onto DBT. And yeah, the initial kind of migration was kind of a lift and shift of the kind of core pipeline and just putting it straight into DBT with no kind of crazy DBT functionality, just SQL. But yeah, we're still actually got a lot of transformation that's actually still not on DBT. And it's mainly, at the moment, the kind of BI side of things. So that's the kind of next step. If you've got kind of the getting it from source data systems and doing the first initial bit of kind of data wrangling, and then it gets into a nice kind of product. But then BI get their hands on it and kind of go, oh, actually, we want to do this slightly differently and do like loads of other transformations and add the business logic side of things as well. And so yeah, that side of our pipeline is actually still off DBT in our legacy systems. And yeah, finding it pretty hard to get off that in general, and that's why we're doing a kind of whole refactor of our data model to be able to try and do that, basically. But yeah, so there's definitely some kind of BI stuff that it's harder to convince, I think, like BI stakeholders to move over to a product like DBT, because it's a bit more kind of engineer focused, and a lot of our BI teams is less engineer focused. They kind of maybe want drag and drop. They might want it to be really nice and easy. So yeah, there's definitely some of that, but yeah, we are going to be moving forward with that, and like trying to get that off, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, as well, I think BI kind of do also a lot of kind of ad hoc transformations, and that's kind of stuff that potentially does live in a notebook or in a random worksheet or anything like that is a potentially one-time kind of transformation that they'll do, and they'll answer one kind of business question. And potentially go back to that like in a month's time, run it again and see kind of where it goes. It might kind of go into the BI layer and like actually be automated at some point. And that's kind of where that automatically gets generated from like ad hoc stuff into automation. So yeah, still some kind of stuff that lives off there. But and the other thing as well that is more for analytics engineering as well is the kind of prototyping phase. So the kind of prototyping of when you're building a new feature or you're bug fixing something, I'll be kind of doing that prototype and investigation and discovery in a notebook. And then we'll kind of build up my notebook so that I'm getting to an end product, an end query that I can push into DBT. But that prototyping is still good to be, I think it's good to be documented and done off DBT so that you can kind of have that, documentation of this is exactly what I've done. This is all the kind of wormholes that I've gone down into that isn't really, you don't want to put wormholes into DBT. You don't want to put the bad stuff into DBT. You want to like make that live elsewhere so that you have your analysts or analytics engineers like aware of how you've done something. So that they can go back in a year, a week, whenever tomorrow is time to see what's actually happened.
So you detailed at least 3 types of transformations there that have this very like agile nature to them. You said, hey, look, like our BI people, they've got access to some tables, but they often need to take that data and transform it actually into their current needs, whatever that might be. And maybe they actually like the agility to be able to do that quickly because they don't know the answers to their questions with the tables that have been provided to them. So it seems like a reasonable type of transformation, to have, although I'm sure it's a pain in your butt sometimes to have that happen. It seems reasonable. If I was an analyst, I would probably do a whole bunch of exploratory transformation until I get what I want. The other type is that you said there were ad hoc requests coming in. And again, this seems like the type of transformations that are predicated on being quick and agile and addressing questions that are opportunistic. And this is not something that maybe is such a frequent business need that it needs to be put into this concrete DBT state. So again, this seems like a kind of transformation that we have some tension about, but it's a good kind of transformation, if I could make that argument, that maybe some kinds of transformations never belong in DBT, and it's actually good for the company to have those not captured by DBT. And then the third kind was that you have this sort of lift and shift mentality, which is like, look, these actually should be in DBT, but before they get there, I prefer to use like a notebook or some sort of exploratory programming interface to be able to actually define those models the way I want, and then I can lift and shift them out into this concrete standardized land of DBT. That also seems, in a way, like a very reasonable way of moving quickly. What I find is very interesting there is you said that also, those types of transformations also require documentation and collaboration, and presumably other people need to like look at those transformations, even though they're prototypes, and say, what the heck is going on here? What did Benji do here? Even though it's not being captured in DBT. Is that like a fair roundup of the different types of transformations you've seen?
Yeah, exactly.
So one question about ad hoc requests. Whose job is it to say, hey, this is no longer an ad hoc request. We've gotten this frequent enough. Let's push this down into DBT. Can you describe what must be a perfectly standardized process for data teams now to deal with ad hoc requests and when to make them concrete? Nils?
Yeah, so I think there's always this tension where you have individual business users, data scientists who are trying to come up with something, and they almost work in a silo of thinking about their data sets. They're doing their ad hoc queries, and they have their results that they're looking for. And your sort of job as an analytics engineer, and what I've seen, is seeing which ones keep getting run over and over, and finding those queries and finding those people and understanding and explaining to them and helping them get it into something like DBT, where we can make it faster, we can make it easier. And I think there's a big organizational question there, where how do you, as you said, Alan, whose job is it to go around and harangue all these people and try to see what is being done over and over again and help them get that in? Because I mean, these are, again, new tools. A lot of people might not even know that they have these functionalities where they're just frequently will have the same queries sitting in their own personal notebook that they keep running and get the results. And I think there's a role there where for someone to socialize the capabilities and really try to organize other people's queries. At least that's in our world.
Is there a good SaaS startup company idea here where we just create a new tool for the modern data stack and it just tells you when ad hoc queries shouldn't be ad hoc anymore?
Yeah, you could maybe look at similar SQL queries that people are running across the organization and try to identify ones that could be materialized or something.
Yeah, I think there's something to say as well about how that is the job of a good analyst as well. A good analyst should be able, or worker, engineer, anyone that's writing that query, they should recognize themselves when that's becoming a request that they're running weekly, or they're running that needs to be concretized. But yeah, so you'd hope that the rest of the whole of your team are able to kind of do that, and then kind of think bigger picture and see how does that fit into the data model. Is it actually that specific query needs to be run and put into DBT, or is it a little extra kind of feature into module into the data model? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll also say that from the perspective of a people manager, one thing that you want to try and do on your team is make sure that knowledge is shared across the different people on the team so that they can recognize, oh, the other person on my team who I don't work with every day is doing the same thing over and over again. And it ends up being an opportunity for knowledge sharing and collaboration and cooperation. But it doesn't necessarily happen if you don't consciously create structures where people are sharing that information, or someone who's running your Scrum process is watching and identifying those shared themes across all the different things that people are doing.
Yeah, I think that's also probably important to make sure that those types of queries are in the right place so that people can see that. So it's, yeah, I mean, you can do that verbally on stand-ups or meetings to be able to say that I'm running this query or whatever. But yeah, ideally you kind of have one specific place, or notebooks where you can go back and see what has someone else done on this topic. You kind of search for a certain topic and go, oh, someone has actually done this before. Because yeah, like 5 different people could be running the same query at the same time, not knowing that everyone is wanting that. And if it's all in one place, it's all in one notebook, they can explore that already, and it's kind of there.
I will add as well that there is, on the flip side, you kind of want to be careful about how much you're trying to pressure things in, like, down the data stack. There are things that you know are only going to be run once. You know, data scientists who are trying to feature engineer something, and, you know, there's a lot of different attempts to come up with the right one. There's so many failed experiments out there, and I think it's on them and on us to figure out, you know, what is, like, actually, like, not something we do want to put into DBT. Because, like, you don't want to be in a world where you now are just supporting thousands of queries that no one's ever running, and then you just, like, have, you start getting into, like, massive tech debt. And so you do have to be discerning, I think, as well.
I'm really fascinated by the boundary between DBT and the wild, wild west outside of that. And it kind of sounds like what you're saying is that we all have to, like, live in this tension that not everything is as squeaky clean and standardized as we would want it to be. And I think as humans, we want things to be in, like, tidy little boxes. But the reality is that there is so much gray area, even on the topic of data transformation. And actually, maybe, like, what really makes the wheels turn is where standardized processes meet the chaos, is where the order meets the chaos. That's actually what makes things move quick when they need to move quick, and stay reliable and rigorous when they need to stay reliable and rigorous. And I just think that's like maybe that's like a nice way for data teams to look at it. Anyway, there was no question there. I just wanted to make that statement. So I can switch gears just a little bit. Katie, I want to ask you a question about Excel.
Okay.
Would you agree? Now, the most successful tool for data transformation probably is Excel. That's maybe a slightly provocative thing to say.
Depends on success definitions, but yeah.
It depends on how you define success / failure. But I just know from working in companies with older data stacks that there is a heck of a lot of knowledge. And we talked about, like Tristan talked about, knowledge, like disseminating knowledge and acquiring knowledge is kind of our end goal. There's a heck of a lot of knowledge sitting in awful spreadsheets on people's desks. So my question is, as DBT, the boundary of DBT starts to expand and encompass more tools, will there be some sort of DBT Excel connector in the future? What do you think about that?
I think it would be smart for someone to build it. So much data ends up in Excel anyway. You can kind of cut out all of the other middle layers. But at least in my mind, transformation is about what needs to be consistent, or at least transformation when we're talking about transformation in the context of DBT. And one of the problems that you get when you have an Excel workbook or many Excel workbooks that don't match, it's inconsistency. And being able to then port what you're doing in an Excel workbook, which may be actually very good data analysis. Like, maybe that's controversial to say, but a lot of good data analysis can happen and does happen in Excel. But when you need to share that and share the process and make things repeatable, being able to push it back into something like DBT that's a bit more governed and a bit more systematic, and there's less room for human error or analyst degrees of freedom, that would be really useful. And I would like to see something like that, I think.
Yeah, like, wouldn't it be so cool if there's, like, you know, a business analyst or someone, some stakeholder is doing some pretty darn good transformations in Excel, and then, like, something pops up and it's like, this should actually be pushed down into the stack. Like, I've notified Benji, you know, and it's like, you will be contacted. But I mean, maybe there's a future for that, because it does seem like DBT's got the semantic layer now. They're going to gobble up what used to not be done with the semantic layer. And now they have Python, and they're going to gobble up transformations that maybe were outside of the purview of DBT. So it's only reasonable to assume that at some level, they're going to be able to make concrete things that we don't think are concreteable now, you know. So anyway, I really wanted to talk about Excel, and just because I think it's like an under talked about things
It's the original
conferences
data
like this.
platform.
Yeah, it's like a universal data platform, for better or for worse. And again, it goes back to that thing, like, we have to have things that are messy and agile, otherwise things won't move. So it's a good example. And I think notebooks also fall into that category as well, right? Like, notebooks often get criticized as not, as like encouraging bad software practices. You know, they're notoriously hard to version and this and that. But again, like, that's the kind of healthy tension that I think it's nice to have on a data team, where you have some tools that are meant for chaos and some tools that are meant for order. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's something in that, like these data and analysis islands. They're just like spread out, and because people come from different backgrounds and they use different tools, and they are good at those tools, and like they do good work in those tools. But I think it's the job of a lot of new data startups and data companies to build bridges into those, so that it's easy and it's not like Benji's going to come fix this for you, like take it over, for them to be able to start getting their toes wet in that world and like see that there's more out there, while still allowing them to be productive in the tools that they like to use. And that's why I'm so encouraged seeing so many different kinds of connectors, so many different platforms like starting to integrate together.
Yeah, I mean, this is going off on a slight tangent, but yeah, in terms of the kind of little pop-up that goes, yeah, this should be put into DBT or something like that. I mean, even just looking at Excel and going, like, if someone has pivot tabled something, there's like a little toggle that you get to say, you could do this in SQL, or like, this is the SQL like query that could do that. Because yeah, when I was at a company before, and I was using Microsoft Access databases to do my kind of data stack. And yeah, there's that toggle of like, getting a drag and drop like formation of the model into SQL, and like that revolutionized. That was like the start. This was a long time ago, but like that was the start of me understanding how like data warehouses work. Was that toggle between like a visual version of a data model and SQL, and yeah, that would totally be interesting in Excel as well. Like complete tangent to this conversation, I think.
love
but
it.
yeah, that might be the next step. That's definitely possible. Like
There's
pretty quickly.
so many good startup ideas here for us. So we're getting close to coming up to time here. I wanted to do like just a really quick fire thing here. We have the transformation layer. We have the semantic layer. What's the next layer? We can just go around. Make it thoughtful.
So yeah, I mean, we've had a thought about this in general. I mean, we've got a couple. I mean, the introduction of kind of Python in DBT, I think, is going to allow us to do a lot more in DBT. And I mean, I think one thing that potentially unlocks is like a kind of ingestion layer. Like that kind of doesn't really come into DBT at the moment, exactly. Or like, yeah, a lot of people don't do that there. But when you've got kind of Python, you're able to do Python in DBT, maybe that is. I mean, that's probably talking 5 years time, or like, yeah, proper blue sky thinking. But yeah, that's one thing that I think that I could see it going down.
Okay, ingestion layer.
Yeah.
What do you think, Katie?
I would like a correlation or a causation layer. They're not the same thing. But once you start having semantically defined metrics, the next question you often have is how they're related to each other. And so many like advanced analysis topics are really just about like what causes this metric to move. Like what other metric can we focus on moving, because it's a leading indicator of this other thing that's ultimately the best measure of our business, but is not sensitive to experimentation, for example. So I'd like to see something that kind of aids in analysis in a more automatic way, like a correlation layer.
I'd like to see potentially like a deployment or predictive deployment layer, something where we can take, I mean, we've seen, what you can do now in Snowpark and starting to train models inside of Snowflake, but I'd like to get to the next step there, where you could deploy that model, have it accessible through an API, and like really integrate it into potentially a real-time data stack, more than or past just data analytics, and have it part of your core systems. That's
Awesome. Well, you heard it here. These are the next layers. Credit where credit's due. So look, we're at time. I hope you all enjoyed this rather candid discussion of data transformations outside of DBT. Please leave some questions in the Coalesce, but really what is transformation Slack channel. And most of all, I'd like to thank our panelists, Katie, Benji, and Nils. Thank you so much.